Hi, Chana.
Hi.
Um, let's start our conversation. And my first question: what is good musical composition for you? Right? But for you,
What is a good musical composition for me? Well, whether it's a composition or improvisation, or what it doesn't matter the form, but I usually like music that surprise me, that challenges me also, that instead of responding to my already existing feelings and memories, I prefer or I enjoy more music that doesn't let me think something about myself. That just makes me kind of almost forces me to focus to it. So yeah, I can summarize like this.
yes, maybe you can one reveal what was the last piece, right?
Sorry.
Maybe can you say what was the last piece? Who was
Mhm.
surprising for
What
you?
was the last piece?
Yeah, yes, which works in that way on you, right?
uh, what was the last piece? Let me think. These days, um, I think, yeah, these days I've been trying to update the particular kind of, or like a particular kind of music that gives a particular kind of feeling, and I started to make new folders for my music, like because until very recently I was organizing my music as in folders with known genres, like just classical, jazz, whatever, but like I started to reorganize my music based on the kind of feeling or the main feeling they give me. So I made this new folder which I called My Kind of Sweet. So I was discovering actually new musics, let's say, on this that gives me this kind of feeling. And
Yes.
one of the artists I found was Rushcha V, Rushcha V. At least that is how it's written, and it has an album called "Who Are You." So yeah, I can send afterwards. So that's one of the pieces that I've been enjoying a lot lately. And from there, like based on the suggestions in Bandcamp and this kind of platforms, I went into more contemporary electroacoustic African musicians, and find out like musicians like Mama Ansani and this kind of stuff. So I'm a little bit wandering around, and yeah, trying to make new lists, trying to kind of leave my comfort zone a little bit.
Yes, got it. And let's imagine that you were a musicologist, right? And you need
I
to write
well,
write
I
article
would,
about yourself, right? And you need
yeah,
to describe yourself. And
I need
what
to describe myself. Yeah,
yes, what would
well,
be your style or signature or musical ideas which you usually came more frequently?
uh, well, how to describe myself? Well, I just finished my PhD in music technology,
Yeah.
but I was affiliated in the musicology department. But
Yes.
when knowing the work of my colleagues in the department, it's really not easy. I wouldn't call myself a musicologist
Yes.
because I really don't deep dive in understanding music in that sense, because we can simply define musicology as kind of it's about understanding music.
Yeah.
It's about understanding the logic of music, how music works in different levels, of course. So of course, my PhD included some aspects of this, but it was mostly it was based on developing systems and evaluating these systems in artistic situations. So it was a little bit of a borderline between performing arts, computer science, and a little bit of maybe musicology. And there is a particular subset of musicology, which is called systematic musicology. So it's a little bit, maybe it can be included there, because I did lots of quantitative studies with like understanding how bodily signals transform into sound and this kind of things.
But you as
sorry?
But you as a composer, right? What questions or you are more interested to explore in your music, right?
Well, I think one thing that we need to make clear about composition is that also, like, what is a composer is changing, I think, right now.
True.
So well, for a pen and paper composer, so to speak, for like old school composers who really compose their musics on the on score and writing and creating everything with all the dynamics and everything, using mostly some visual techniques to create compositions. Maybe composers who use their studio and their digital workstations, they may not be composers in the same sense. Or for composers who make their music in their studio using all different kinds of hardwares and softwares. The composers who make circuits and do programming to create, for instance, algorithmic compositions and this kind of thing. Maybe they may not be exactly the kind of composers that, so I think it's a little bit depending on.
yes, but what kind of composer you are, right?
Yeah, that's where I'm coming to. Like, I think I feel more like in the third group. I build things that make music. So in that sense,
but you mean by hardware or by software, or you build both?
Both, actually. Well, at first, like many years ago, I was doing lots of hardware, and I had quite several performances with different hardwares and hacked hardware or created from scratch hardware that I was performing. But for the last 5 years, maybe for 5 years, I focused a lot on software, and especially like since I started to work a lot with machine learning, artificial intelligence, and this kind of techniques. So I work a lot with the software. But I realized that programming, even though you don't program the sounds directly, programming different aspects of music can be also seen part of composing. Because basically you program a program that makes the music. So in that sense, what's creative, it's not the program, it's whoever creates the program itself, I think. So this is funny, by the way, like 2 days ago I was in a talk of Creative Computation Hub in Oslo here, and that was the topic that we talked, because you create artificial intelligence systems that create music, and then who gets the credit here? Who's the creative? So it's a little bit an ongoing debate. But
got it. And coming back, right? It's very interesting. You said that you have the period when you were interested in hardware and the software, and this is one of, let's say, the way how you feel yourself as composer, what triggers you to create hardware? What was the trigger?
To create what? Sorry, I couldn't.
Start to build your own hardware, your own.
Well, there are a few different reasons. First, I always like the solder smell. So maybe, I don't know. My uncle had a company, a little company, and a workshop where he was building elevator electronics, like these LEDs and the buttons in the found in the elevator. So he was basically producing these circuits, elevator circuits, and selling them. So since my childhood, I'm kind of very used to building circuits around me and this solder smell and so on. So it was something always familiar for me. So it was quite intuitive to start working. And also, like, I was one of those kids who was opening all the electronics at like household electronics at home, and either breaking them or doing something else from them, and then getting, not, if not slapped, getting a little bit being angry by the parents. So so it was kind of an intuitive start for me to to open something and take out the screws and see what's going on there. And then I also met this Nick Collins and his like hardware hacking book and this kind of stuff, and got into more noise scene and met lots of people who do circuit bending and developing their own hardwares and so on. So it was a little bit like natural.
Yes, and what kind of hardware you developed, right? What was it was some specific instruments or
I was doing lots of these little noise boxes, working with very simple op amps and creating simple synthesizers. And of course, like, as you learn more, you add a little bit of filter circuit and add a little bit of effect circuit, and then you mix it with different sensors. And around that time, I also around the time I started to work with hardware, I also started my master's, where it was in a music technology programs, where I learned more techniques and more theory, also, so to speak, of both building hardwares and building computer programs. So it started to give me a little bit more knowledge to work with these things more, how can I say, in a more mature and, with knowing more what you're doing.
Yes. And then you said, then you switched to more to the softwares. And what was the triggers there, right?
Yeah, well, there were some practical reasons. Like, I remember for my master's thesis, I developed this hardware where I was controlling effects pedals. It was like a little, almost like a little robotic hardware that you were plugging, hooking, and that's the right word, hooking on effects pedals knobs, and you were controlling this motor with your muscle movements, basically. So developing this hardware piece has been quite joyful, but on the other hand, what I realized, that compared to the time I spent on this hardware, the kind of efficiency I get from it was not so big. And what I mean by that is, the hardware is not easy to change. Like, once you build a circuit, you cannot change the circuit easily. You cannot just undo what you just soldered there. So it's a much different approach, and it's a much different scale. But I wanted to work on things that I can modify much easily, and I can change much easily, because also it's a little bit my character. Like, I can get bored easily, so I need to I need to have a faster working
Yes.
flow. So this is why I decided on focusing on software more when I started my PhD. So and also one other reason, I was touring a lot, and also I was moving a lot between different countries. So I realized that taking hardware and tools with me was also another, like, this is why, like, this has practical reasons. I still like working with hardware, but I focus on software for more practical reasons.
Got it.
Yeah. So yeah, and since my PhD, I started to develop programs instead of hardware pieces.
Yes, and what kind of programs you have developed so far?
Well, I develop programs for interactive dance, for sensor-based performances, for more, human AI interaction, and this kind of things, like quite different programs. Like, for instance, I worked on this multi-agent systems that, just program different little hardware still, because there are also embedded hardwares, like you can program the hardware itself, and then it can be used in interaction. So I also worked on autonomous systems that make music by itself, basically. So, like, long story short, from being performing actively with hardwares, I found myself to programming things and that I let play by itself instead
Okay,
of
got
me
it.
interacting with
Got
them.
it. Right, you become lazier and lazier, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, why you need performing if you can create a smart robot, right?
Exactly. So it's kind of fun. And this is why, like, my thesis starts, like, this is also my supervisor told me to say, my thesis starts. Okay, I started to do all these things because I was just bored of, doing, I was developing something, and I was getting bored of it, because the problem with electronic hardware and software compared to acoustic instruments, like, with acoustic instruments, there is always something new to explore in that instrument. Even, like, think about the guitar. Like, it's the most popular instrument, right? But still, it never gets old. You always find something, and it's actually a very limited piece of hardware. Like, but
Yes.
still, it's it's made in a way that it's just always there's something new to do. But with electronic instruments, it's not the same. It's kind of, their destiny is to get old very easily. And one reason is that technology improves rapidly, so a piece of hardware becomes old very easily, becomes outdated. And the other reason is that you never build an instrument like guitar in that sense. So it's, yeah, it's quite a long discussion, and it's quite also an important topic that instrument makers discuss a lot. But the new instruments are a bit bound to get outdated and get even boring very easily. And if you
Yes.
look at the people who work with these kind of instruments, you don't see one type of instrument that is used many times for many years. You don't see that much. There are only few examples that are still being used after many years. So it's yeah.
I have noticed that you have quite many musical pieces where you use gesture controllers, right?
Yeah.
Why it's so? It's just why you're so fond in love with this gesture controllers.
Gestural
What was
controllers.
story?
Yeah.
What is the story behind it?
Yeah, it's because, like, I started to work with. I've explored computers to make music at some point in my life, and I was amazed by the possibility of sounds with computers. But then, like, it was only the only interaction scenario with the computer, with the laptop, was the touchpad and the keyboard, so the mouse and the keyboard. So the sounds were great. I was enjoying the sounds a lot, but when it comes to playing those sounds, it just it didn't feel right, because I'm coming from being a guitarist, like going to stage, taking the guitar, like using your whole body with your, all the muscles, all the motion, and all the, physical energy. And then when it comes to laptop, it just limits you so drastically compared to the guitar. So my first motivation was like, okay, I need to use these sounds, but while using these sounds, I need to get a similar physical feeling as I was getting from guitar. So I need to play something like guitar, but get more computer sounds out of it. So that was that was my main motivation.
And why AI?
AI came afterwards, because the AI actually was because of this getting bored part, because I made lots of computer instruments, but they were not based on AI or anything. They were fixed. So, you do something like this and then it makes a sound, right? And these instruments were always nice in the beginning. It was fun. But then over time, they just became boring, and I had to modify them all the time to make it work with different contexts. For instance, you make an instrument, and then if you want to use that instrument with different ensembles, then you need to modify it. Then I was like, okay, then I can use a little bit of machine listening, and then I can say, when I play with different musicians, then the computer can listen to the other musicians, and it can change some parameters without me being explicitly programming it or changing it. And this is basically called what is defined as agents. You basically create little artificial agents in your instrument that adjust parameters based on the incoming signals from other musicians. This is really, like, you can think of it as like this thermostats at our homes, based on the temperature of your living room, it adjusts the heater's temperature, right? So it was a bit like that. And I liked it a lot. And then I start to think, okay, then I can I can create more agents that change more parameters based on different things. For instance, if I play something very loud, then it can change the kind of synthesis I'm using, forcing me to go to somewhere else. Or if log the kind of inputs I play, and then for instance, after 5 minutes, if the average of my inputs is one type, then it can force me to use another input, and so on and so forth. So I started to use agents or AI in that sense to force me to play something different, to surprise me in my own performance, actually. So that was the main motivation for AI, surprise.
Got it. And right, at the beginning of our conversation, you made some typology, right, of composers. You said there is those who work only with sounds and sound systems, and there's who work with the sounds but in the studio, and then, like, you build hardware or software. And I am just thinking, right, if we would go and start conversation from the first type of composers, right, then they would say something about your musical system, right? Then what is your musical system of what kind of I don't know, in in what kind of musical system you feel more comfortable or you want to create, right?
I think I feel very comfortable right now about creating musical systems that create music,
Yes.
and
But
instead
it's
of creating,
Western, right? It's Western systems, or it's Turkish systems, or it's some kind of blend, or
yeah,
academic.
in terms of musical kind of style or
Yes,
musical
yes.
approach. Yeah,
Or
well,
musical
they're not
languages, right?
musical language. Okay, so they're not Turkish, they're not Western either, because I mostly work on the what can be called as sound-based electroacoustic aesthetics, which are not really, which don't rely on the discrete system of Western music. And what I mean by discrete system, in Western music is there are fixed pitches, fixed time, fixed meter, and fixed instrumentations, right? So you go from C to C sharp and to D. So you're not really you're not really interested in whatever is in between C and C sharp. When it comes to more, of course, in non-Western, there are many non-Western music systems, like Turkish music. There are lots of microtones and different microtonal systems, of course. But still, they all based on some kind of music theoretical system. But there is also another there are also other ways, other music systems, musical languages that are not based on different combinations of different predefined pitches. And this is what I call as a large group. This is how I call this large group as electroacoustic aesthetics and sound-based music, because where you really start working with the audio features instead of some abstract information like pitch. So this is why I find myself working with sounds most of the time rather than a certain musical style. But of course, I still play lots of styles that uses some Western systems and so on. So it's not like a debate or competition here. Like I'm not against it. It's just I like the sound phenomena first of all, and try to explore different sounds and so on.
If you were a female, would your music would be the same, or it would be different?
If I was a female, that's a very controversial question, and I think if I was something different, if I had if my gender, my sex, my culture, my ethnicity, uh, like everything, if things were different, of course my music would be different. Like I think that people's no one's creativity can be think isolated from their physical features, and also more than physical features, their social and cultural
Yes.
features. Music, first of all, is an embodied thing. You make music with your body, and your body is situated in an environment. So you abide the features of the environment, and this environment has physical features too. For instance, if you play in a church, you play differently than playing in a very dry studio environment. For instance, it affects the way you play immediately. And similarly, the kind of cultural environment you grow up or you play at that moment also affects what you play. Like for instance, if you play in a contemporary classical music festival, you would probably play differently than playing in a noise festival, for instance. Like these are different audiences, and different audience will inspire you playing a little bit differently. also the culture you grow up makes you, so I
Yes, yes,
think,
that's
I
yes,
think I
I'm
would
buying
be,
it.
yeah, I would probably be making something different if I was something different, including my gender and sex, right? So
Yes, and of course, it's very hard to reimagine yourself in as a gender, right? But you very correctly said, which I like very much in your last what you said in last minute, right? That there is some compositional things which affects you as a personality and as a composer, and then of course the question is so obvious, right? So you long time, as I understand, you born right in Turkey, right?
you mean right now?
No, you born right, and
I born, yeah. I born
and
and grow up in Turkey, yeah.
yes, and how just um, right zooming out, right? How it could influence you as a composer, right?
Uh, I it's not easy to I think uh, understand the exact causalities here, but what I realized that living in Norway is I think we like in general, what I realized that me, myself, and my friends, and many people I meet here who are from different countries, different Mediterranean countries, we have a common we have common expressive resources, a common way of gesturing and common way of talking, which is different than people from North.
Yes,
Not necessarily better or worse, but it's just different. We're
yes,
louder, for instance.
yes,
We use more, like, we take more space, and we're less careful about other people's individual spaces, personal
yes,
spaces.
yes,
We tend to, invade other people's spaces more easily, which on one hand, which creates a very intimate and sincere relationship, but on the other hand, it's also prone to create lots of dramas and not being careful about other people's needs. So these are things easy to understand, but like when it comes to music, how these things affect your music, it's not easy to follow. But I think I can speculate that this expressive habit must have some influence on why I started to work with gestural controllers in the first place.
yes,
Because I have a huge need for expressing my physical, expressing physically, let's say. I cannot just sit and type. For instance, I like live coding a lot, and I have lots of live coder colleagues, and I also enjoy making music by writing computer program in real time. But there was one performance. It was a very funny video, and it kind of confirmed everything I was thinking, because we're performing three people and we're all performing in a live coding in a particular live coding language. Two of us are next to each other in Trondheim, and the third performer, it was on Sweden, so we were performing through network. And like we're all typing, of course, like a live coding. But if you look at me in the video, I'm like this all the time, like
got it.
so I feel like I need to move. I really like, I'm like that. So
Yes, 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 got
maybe
it,
it's a cultural thing, maybe not, but
got it, got it, got it. And what is like a typical process for you to creating music or composing music? How you
so
start, and
what is what?
like typical process how you create music or compose it. how you start, right, and what kind of stages you go through.
It's not easy to answer this, because especially since I started my PhD, I almost never start from the intention of making music in the first place. I always start either with more of an engineering idea, like for instance, I want to develop this kind of system. Or I start from more of a scientific question, like for instance, what's the relationship between muscles and sound?
Yes.
So for the last 4 years, at least, I made all music I made starting with rather non-musical questions or intentions. So this is why I would answer your question by my typical process in the last few years has been starting from a non-musical goal, ending with music.
Yeah. Okay, and what stages you go through that, right?
Well, first I decide on I start from an idea, from a very raw idea and concept. Like this concept can be this concept usually include what kind of interactive scenario I'm imagining. For instance, what if am I going to use a sensor? If yes, what kind of sensor? And am I going to use it with another instrument, or am I going to use the sensors as the only input to make sound? Am I going to use any other hardware or not? So this is the kind of the interaction part that I decide. And then I decide, okay, so what kind of program, what kind of software I aim for? Would I use some kind of learning algorithm here? Will I make all mappings by explicitly programming and so on? So I decide on this technical aspects, but also like I have more abstract starting ideas too. For instance, do I want to make an instrument or a musical partner, for instance? So this is also one of the things I explored in my thesis. You know, I made instruments that are more instruments and tools, and I made systems that feel more like a partner while playing. So and I made this continuum from tool to actor and so on. So this is another topic, but so the starting points are usually both conceptual in a higher level, and also I decide on some methods and techniques to start with. For instance, I say, okay, I will use this model, this machine learning model, and I will use it in this way, for instance, and so on and so forth. So I must say, analogically, it's a little bit similar to, for instance, you're a musician in your studio and you have a synthesizer there and the guitar there and maybe a little percussion there, and you have your computer and you say, okay, I will open my digital audio workstation and I will use my synthesizer to make the bass line, and I will use my bendir, for instance, to play the percussion, and I will use my guitar to play the chords or the melody. So similar to that, I say, okay, I will use this model to predict this audio future based on based on this input from my forearm, for instance. It's just I'm using non-musical tools to make music, but the process can be seen a little similar.
Yes.
in that sense.
Yes.
Yes, in that way, yeah.
So and when music start appearing,
Sorry?
and when sounds and or scores start appearing, what is
Well, sometimes it starts quite immediately, but sometimes it takes many times. For instance, if especially when you're using with techniques like deep learning and this kind of stuff, then you spend a lot of time with collecting data, because most of the time there is not a good data set for your purpose. So, and then you spend quite some time in working on that data. And when I mean my working on the data is processing the data, parsing the data, aligning the data if you need to do some synchronization and so on. And then you build your model, and you make sure that it is the right model for your aims and to work with that data. And then you make the training, and usually this training part takes a lot of time, because first of all, the training process itself, it's a long process. It takes from hours to days based on depending on the kind of data you're working with. And then since it's quite a trial and error process, you train your model and you see where it fails, and then you train it again. You change some parameters and you train it again and you train it again. And for weeks maybe, and sometimes for months, this process can go, because it's like when you're using these techniques for an engineering problem, then it's different, because you know what problem you're trying to solve. But when you're using these techniques for an artistic purpose, then you don't know what you're going to solve with it. So every time you need to develop your system and you need to test it in a musical context, and then develop again, or change again. So it's a very iterative prototyping, iterative design process, and it takes a lot of time until you can really start using it in an actual musical concert situations, like in an actual situations outside of your room, basically. It must sometimes takes months, maybe sometimes takes even years, depending on what you're trying to do.
Got it. And what are, let's say, for you, what are the most used or most important technological artifacts, softwares or hardwares, right? Because you are very, very tech-savvy composer, right?
Yeah. What is the most important software or hardware, you ask? That's the question?
Yes.
Well, there is not one answer to that. For instance, for my audio programming, I always use Maxim SP.
Yes.
But for the last 1 year at the university, I've been teaching audio programming with Pure Data, because Pure Data is open source, first of all, and it's free. And at the university, we don't teach things that you have to pay for. So, and also ethically, I really favor this using the free tools and using open source tools. But on the other hand, I've been always much more comfortable with Maxim SP. So this is why there is no one answer to that. So I cannot say Pure Data is the best tool to work with, or Maxim SP.
Yes.
Because these are, for instance, graphical programming languages, and there are certain aspects, depending on what you're trying to make, then the graphical programming languages become quite almost pain in the ass. Then you want to use some kind of text-based programming language, especially when you're working with data. like if you're working with sonification, for instance, like you can of course work with sonification data to some extent on MaxMSP or pure data, but then you may want to add some more some text-based, like Python kind of high-level language, where you can much easily work on different aspects of data processing and so on and so forth. So it's a little bit depending on what you're trying to do. For instance, if you're working with live coding, you really don't use programs like MaxMSP or Pure Data, but you use something else.
Yes.
Many live coder friends of mine, they usually start with Super Collider and then they go to some other environments like Tidal Cycles or I don't know, Sonic Pi, or like for instance, my colleague here at the University of Oslo, he just developed a new language called Glycol,
Yes.
Which is another live coding language. So yeah, there is, and it's ever growing things. The people are
Yes, but more frequently, right? As composers,
yeah,
what software
people are
do you
creating
use?
their own environments.
Yes, that's no sure. This one trend that a lot of composers create their own, right? But regarding you, what software you use the most frequently, right? Looking back on your
That's
pieces.
that's what I said. I've been using MaxMSP a lot for
Yes.
for the audio part, and I use, as a programming language, I use Python a lot because
Got
which
it.
is kind of standard for
AI, right?
machine learning and
Yes.
artificial intelligence and all these kind of things. And that's usually, these are the two
And hardware?
two things. Hardware, like I've been using as a sensor, I've been using this Mayo armbands a lot,
Yes.
which are discontinued, so these are not produced anymore. These are like both EMG and IMU sensors that I've been using a lot. And of course, when it comes to prototyping, I used Arduinos a lot, and
Got
I
it.
still use them to prototype things. I use, Raspberry Pi from time to time if I really need to embed things. It's especially like when I use Bella a lot. With some installations we developed here at the university, we use Bella a lot as the hardware. Bella is a very, very good hardware for musical purposes, because you can program it. You can program it with many different languages, including your data.
Yes.
Actually,
Can you explain in one sentence what Bella is?
Bella is a developing environment, is a hardware, piece of hardware that that focuses on non-latency or low latency. There is no such thing as non-latency, but low latency audio processing, and it's based on it's a kind of a hardware cap that is placed on a microcomputer called BeagleBone. So it's basically it's like an extra hardware that you use with a microcomputer, and it gives you lots of analog and digital inputs and outputs, and it has a very sophisticated processing infrastructure, so that you can program your own audio audio programs. Basically, you can use different languages like Pure Data. You can use C Sounds, Super Collider. You can use, of course, C Sharp, not C++, and now they added lots of new languages. So bunch of different languages, and you can program your own instruments. Basically, you can create your own instruments. You can add, of course, lots of sensors, and it's just based on your imagination. It's a really nice piece of hardware, and it's maintained really nicely. I met several developers of it, and they're all very nice people, and they're all very helpful. So yeah, like if people are interested in creating their own instruments and they don't want to use laptop while they don't want to carry laptop around when they create new instruments, then Bella is a very good option to work on, to
Yes.
work with.
Thank you.
So-
And what do you fear as composers the most? What is your composer fear, right?
That the system will not work in a concert.
Okay. Got it. Yeah. Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest fear all the time.
Yeah, yes, yes. It's engineer, right? You as a music engineer, you have even musical engineer fear, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of, yeah, it's like that. Because if it works, you're gonna make sound one way or another. But if it
It doesn't work. Yes. There is no. Yeah. And why you still create music?
sorry?
Compose. Why do you still compose or create music?
Well, I don't know. Like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know why I started to make music in the first place either. But right now, it's also like uh, I don't. If I take out the component of music from what I'm doing, then I don't know what to be excited for. You know, it's just it's. I really don't know the answer to that. It's just you know. I think you love it, and it's like you know.
And now looking right, not on yourself, but on musical scene in general, on new or contemporary art music scene. This century, right, in last 22 years, right, how it changed, right?
Um, okay, I didn't get the question and exactly
How
like
new music or contemporary art music, right? How it
yeah.
changed during this century, right?
Yeah, since 2000, I think it's changed a lot. Well, first of all, the ways we make music changed drastically compared to 90s, where I was a kid, and also in the first part, in the first 10 years of 2000s, were also quite different than the second decade of 2000s. Like I was studying at the university in the first half of 2000s,
Yes.
and I was studying in a music school, and like while I was studying, we were still getting in line to book a studio. And while I was there, they established an online booking system for studio. So it was quite different than today. And I'm not talking about a school in a remote part of Turkey. Like I was studying in Boston, United States, like
Yes.
it was like so, but still the technology was not in the it was in a completely different phase back then. So right now things are much easier to access and both easier to get. For instance, when I was at the university, just buying a sound card was a big thing. Like it was not easy to buy a sound card, and even if you buy one, the kind of sound card that you can afford will be useless to work to use in real time, like in a concert situation. So the recording music and using music technology tools were only something that was reserved for people with budget. Only good studios owned these instruments, and you were able to rent these studios only. So you were not able to use those tools directly. But now it's much easier to, because the technology improved a lot. So it also became easy, cheaper and accessible, right? And also, maybe even more importantly, it became much easier to learn. Like, for instance, similar to how tools were reserved for high-end studios, also the knowledge of using these tools, for instance, to the knowledge of becoming a good mixing engineer, you had to either work in a studio and learn from a master engineer or go to school to learn these things. But nowadays, you can learn everything online. Like right nowadays, you don't need anything to learn tools. If you want to learn programming, great. There are like tons of different tutorials, free tutorials. You want to learn mixing, you want to learn how to cook, you can learn all these things online. The only problem is you cannot learn the personal experience, how people use it, how people apply these tools in their practice. And this is exactly what I teach right now. Like right now in the master's program I'm teaching at, we don't teach the tools in a classical way. Like we before the class time, I send everything, like the video tutorials, the code, everything they need. And when they come to class, I expect them to come by knowing the fundamentals, so that I can show them how I use these tools, how I use these programs or algorithms to make music personally. Like, and I try to teach them, okay, I use it in this way, and you can use it in this way, that way, that way, or in a way that I cannot even imagine. So, and then in the class, I let them do different things, and then we go over what they've done. So everything changed. The way you teach music changed. The way you use tools changed. And of course, in the end, the kind of musics also are changed. For instance, the way you share music changed. Like now we use social media to share music, right? Now there are streaming platforms. Now people cannot listen to long pieces. People cannot even watch long videos. You know, they're like 2 minutes, and that's fine. That's the span for concentration. So everything are changing, not in a bad way necessarily, but not in a good way necessarily either. So I think we're gonna find our ways how to.
Yes, yes,
I don't know. I think I a little bit. Um, I didn't answer your question exactly.
yes, but I understand, right?
Yeah.
That's what
So
you're saying. And what audience? How audience change, right?
audio,
Audience, audience.
audience. Yeah. Well, especially with the COVID, it changed a lot. And yeah, like even before COVID, it started to change. But I think with COVID, we get used to watching things through screens. I think a lot, and also it changed in a way that people realized the value of interaction more during COVID. So what I realized that after COVID, the performances, the audience I saw after COVID is a little bit more energetic and more enthusiastic
Yes.
about events. So so then COVID had a positive, influence in that sense.
And coming back, right, to the contemporary art music scene, right? Mm, what is your imagination? How it look like in 2000, let's say, 35, right? Or after 10 years, yeah? Okay, let's say after 10 years, in 2032, right? What are these trends and what futures to your mind looks like?
For the world, you mean, like in the general sense, like in the
Contemporary art, yes,
contemporary art?
art, music, right? Most probably Europe, right? Because you're more affiliated with Europe and maybe
Yeah.
of Turkey, right? But these
Uh,
are geographies which set the
well,
tone, right?
well,
Europe.
I think well, right now so I'm not the like I don't live on art economically, so it's I cannot be the reference, but like my partner is a freelance artist, and I have lots of freelance artist friends and I know how they struggle in at different levels, but what I foresee, first of all, the finances and economical relationships of arts in general is getting more and more problematic because uh, first of all, the streaming platforms made popular artists and mainstream artists more and more richer or more and more visible, while the more experimental and not that popular artists tend to become poorer or less visible in that sense. And this is why most of the contemporary art right now in developed countries rely on fundings. So you basically you get in Norway, at least, you apply for funding. It can be state funding or it can be private funding, but you get funding and then you do your project based on that funding, right? But this is not the same in non-developed countries, like in Turkey, for instance. Like it's extremely hard to fund your art piece in that sense. But even in Europe, we already started to see lots of cuts in funds, both for arts and also for academia. And there is a crisis coming and growing in Europe, like a financial crisis. So I don't know what it's going to be in 10 years, because the humans are consuming in a much faster pace than they're producing, and when we're thinking about environmental, resources. So things are going to get harder and harder in the coming 10 years. So I don't know, but I'm not very optimistic in where the world headed to in general. But I'm also equally optimistic about the creative energy of humans and nature at large. So humans will find a way of making art in many different ways, of course, and they will find making good art too. But I don't know if there's going to be a world to make
Yes,
art. So that's what I'm not optimistic about. So
yes, got it. And the last question,
yeah,
to your mind, what is the role of new music in
of new music
of new music in Norway, right?
in Norway or
Yes,
in
in Norway.
Norway. I think I was quite surprised that I realized that the new music or the experimental music, this styles and genres are quite on demand in Norway. There are always events and things happening. And Norway is a tiny country, not in terms of not geographically, but it has like 5.5 million people only. So it's almost like one third or even quarter of Istanbul in that sense. But on the other hand, there are lots of people who are interested in this kind of music. So I was quite surprised that I realized that this is, this is a serious place in Europe for new music. Like, because we always tend to think that Berlin is where like everything is happening, but it's not really like that. And after Berlin, Norway and Oslo in particular is, one of the most vibrant places I've seen in terms of new and experimental music. And I think partly is because it's a rich country, so there are resources, and resources are distributed fine, I think, and artists, of course, they have struggles, but they get funded for their works, at least compared to what I know from Turkey. So it's so they have resources to make art, and they use these resources to make art. This is why it's good in that sense. But as a more kind of overarching answer, what's the role of new music in the art world in general? I think it's that's what avant-garde means, right? So you just throw yourself to flames, and then mainstream get inspired by it. Like, I always give this example of, like, in the last 10 years, if you look at mainstream musics, you realize that lots of albums and musicians start using more non-musical elements, more ambient, more noisy, more textural elements in their music compared to 20 years before. So this is how electroacoustic aesthetics, experimental musics influence mainstream in an, of course, non-direct way.
Yes, some kind of as R&D, as collective R&D of music industry.
Yes, exactly. So, and I think it's not a competition between mainstream and experimental. I never felt it like a war between mainstream and underground. I just think that the experimental music's underground and all this has to fight for its space, because it's not easy to survive for these musics. But like, without underground, there cannot be a foreground. Without experimental musicians, without avant-garde musicians, they will not be mainstream musicians either. So they all kind of rely to, they all need each other basically to make music in the end, both aesthetically but also economically. We need the diversity in that sense. We need to benefit from each other culturally and aesthetically, and at many different levels.
Thank you very much for this interview.